Good morning again to everyone and those who just recently joined us. My name is Dr. Fezile Kumalo, and I'm a research fellow at UCT, and I work closely with the GIFT team who have proudly brought this webinar series to us and this is the sixth time that we're bringing this. So for those who are parents, I know that at 6 you're about ready to go to school, but I think we've been doing the schooling quite well since inception. So a bit about the webinar and the series that we've been providing or producing is that it is where we ask questions that matter the most when it comes to female sexual and reproductive health and how research and innovation can improve this area of research. It's a webinar series that is an initiative of the GIFT project, which is the genital inflammation test that was produced and developed at UCT with our partners, Medical Diagnostic, and it is led by fantastic women PI that are both here at UCT and in Australia. And if you'd like to know more about what the GIFT team has been up to and what has developed within our research, please feel free to go to our website, giftafrica.com. On the chat, Leila, who is our communications partner from Jive Media, is going to post a lot of links to the various topics that we're going to be discussing. So please feel free to check those links. As I said, I am Fezile Kumalo, and I'm a researcher on the GIFT team. It is a point-of-care screening tool designed for the detection of genital inflammation, which is an innovation that is focused on improving women's health in low-resource settings. And I would like to once again welcome you to our sixth episode of Women Up to No Good. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring what it takes to translate health innovations into impactful products, specifically in the context of women's lives and more specifically in the African context. And we're asking this because we need to know and be able to navigate how we are able to move from the bench to the real world benefits, which is important, I think, for all of us working in this sector and those working in other sectors as well, where impact is very important. What do we need, or what systems need to be shifted to ensure that innovations that are produced either in the lab or in your startup have equitable and are accessible to the masses that actually need them? And this is why we have set up some of these conversations so that we can start tackling some of those and also share real world examples of how people in various sectors have done this, and also how we bring those different skills together to make this possible. And this couldn't be more timely because across the continent, we know that women's health challenges remain under-addressed, and not because we don't have ideas on how to tackle them, but because innovation doesn't always reach the where it's needed most. And today's speakers, we're going to be talking to wonderful women who are navigating the space in their various areas of work. And we are hoping that through these discussions and similar discussions that are already taking place everywhere, we can start bridging these gaps that don't allow innovation to happen. So with strategy and with purpose, we hope that these things will start coming together. So we're going to be following quite a structured format so that we have all our speakers getting time to speak for the first 40 minutes of the webinar, which will then be followed by a question and answer session. Please feel free to upload your questions onto the chat, where the panelists will then start be able to answer those, but we'll also have the last 20 minutes of this webinar strictly for questions and answers, and those will be run through the chat button on the screen. We do have other episodes of the webinar that have been recorded, so please feel free also to go and check out our previous webinars and see what resonates with you and the work that you are doing. Today we have quite a very diverse panel of speakers who are all trailblazers in their respective fields. First up is Dr. Lindy Masson, who is the Deputy Director of Women's and Children's Adolescents Health Program and head of the HIV Inflammation and Microbiome Group at the Burnet Institute in Australia. She is also a very big member of the GIFT team, having co-developed and the GIFT test. So she works very much in female and reproductive health and with producing or the development of affordable and visible tools to improve sexual and reproductive health, especially in resource settings. Next, we have Dr. Nonhlanhla Mzila, who is a distinguished medical biochemist and is the Chief Scientific Officer at FIMU Healthcare. She also extended her time as a technical expert in the Technology Innovation Agency, where she evaluates technical and commercial feasibility on cutting-edge biomedical innovations. Next up is Dr. Charlotte Masayomule, who has just recently been appointed as a Senior Manager in Biotechnology, Innovation and Commercialization and Market Access Africa, which is a healthcare consultation firm. She's got over 15 years of experience in the life sciences, having headed also some of the big strides in the WHO pre-qualification through her previous employer of Mintech. So she will be telling us more about how do we navigate those regulatory systems. And last but not least is Dr. Charlene Kemmer, who is a research and development manager at Medical Diagnostics, who is our development and manufacturing partner at GIFT. She holds a PhD in physiological sciences and has quite a vast amount of experience in the development, validation, and regulatory approval of lateral flow tests. So with that in mind, the speaking order is going to be as follows. We will first have Nonhlanhla, followed by Charlotte, and then by Charlene, and lastly, Lindy. And I'm not going to be reintroducing anyone in between, just to make sure that we have enough time for the question and answer session later. So without further ado, Nonhlanhla, please go ahead.
Thank you, Gift. Thank you, Fezile, for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I want to share some thoughts on how we can transform healthcare diagnostics by connecting research, industry, innovation, and innovation through biotechnology. South Africa has a strong foundation in biomedical and diagnostic research. Institutions like the CSIR and the South African Medical Research Council and leading universities consistently produce high-impact discoveries in areas such as infectious diseases, oncology, and bioengineering. However, there's a critical gap between what is discovered in the lab and what reaches the markets or the healthcare system. This valley of death is where many promising technologies stall. It's not because the science isn't sound, it's because the commercialization infrastructure is weak. Many researchers lack the training and support needed to translate their innovations into scalable products. University technology transfer offices, where they exist, are often under-resourced or lack expertise in regulatory science and health entrepreneurship. We also see very limited access to seed or proof of concept funding, which is crucial in the early stages of diagnostic development. Yet, there are shining examples like the South African SAMRC's Innovation Fund has supported local TB diagnostic tools. There are startups emerging from CSIR and university labs that have developed scalable innovations, but they are still exceptions. So what do we need to bridge this gap? We need stronger support structures at universities for IP management, business mentorship, and partnership building. We need targeted funding mechanisms to support early stage diagnostic development. We also need a cultural shift, one that values translation and impact just as much as publication. If we can align academic excellence with innovation pipeline, we unlock enormous potential for locally developed diagnostics. Innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires an ecosystem where policies, infrastructure, talent, and regulation work in harmony. South Africa has laid some of the policy groundwork. The bioeconomy strategy, for example, acknowledges the potential of health innovation. There are national funding instruments and institutions like Technology Innovation Agency and the DTIC. But in practice, implementation is often fragmented or slow. Policies need to be better connected in action and outcomes. In terms of infrastructure, we lack dedicated biotech innovation spaces, shared laboratories, clean rooms, and rapid prototyping facilities that help innovators move from concept to prototype without massive capital. There are standards these are standard in countries with vibrant medical technology sectors. In terms of skills, we need to align university education with the demands of the diagnostic industry. This means interdisciplinary programs in regulatory affairs, bioengineering, biotech entrepreneurship, and applied data science. In terms of regulation, while SAPRA is making progress, the process to register diagnostic tools can be slow and unclear, especially for startups. A clear, responsive regulatory pathway is essential if we want to support local innovation. We must also improve collaboration across sectors. Government, academia, and industry, they often work or operate in silos. So creating regular, structured dialogue along with the funding that requires cross-sector participation can unlock more aligned innovation. In short, to create an enabling environment, we must do more than fund ideas. We must build a system that supports, connects, and accelerates those ideas into real-world solutions. Biotechnology is the engine that can drive the next wave of diagnostic innovation in South Africa. Globally, we are seeing a shift toward more personalized, faster, and more precise diagnostics powered by biotech tools like CRISPR-based platforms, lab-on-chip devices, and mobile biosensors. What makes biotech particularly powerful in the South African context is its ability to adapt quickly to local needs. We can develop low-cost, rapid diagnostics for diseases that disproportionately affect our population, like drug-resistant tuberculosis, cervical cancer, and emerging zoonotic infection, like the recent outbreak of foot and mouth disease. We already have the scientific expertise. What we now need is to link biotech research and development directly with industry partners, including manufacturers and distributors. That's how we move from prototype to product. We can learn from models like India's BioRec, which connects startups with government supports, incubators, and validation partners. The United States has a model called SBIR, which also offers insight into how government funding can reduce risk for early stage biotech ventures while keeping IP in the country. By fostering these linkages between research labs, biotech startups, industry mentors, and clinical end users, we build a more connected innovation pipeline. South Africa is also uniquely positioned to become a regional hub for biotech-enabled diagnostics. We have stable governance, strong institutions, and access to regional markets through SADC. If we invest in the right platforms now, we could not only serve our population, but also export made in Africa diagnostics across the continent. So the message here is this: biotech isn't just a scientific opportunity, it's a national development tool. If we support it well, it will pay dividends in public health outcomes, economic growth, and global competitiveness. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
For that wonderful lay of the environment and what needs to happen for diagnostics or innovation that are taking place everywhere, because we don't lack ideas, we just lack or we are unable to execute as properly as we should. So what are the operational systems that need to be in place to enable innovation? And it is that conversation between academia and industry, but also government and their regulatory systems. So thank you for that. Next up is Dr. Charlotte. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm Charlotte Masarumule, newly minted Senior Manager in Biotech Innovation and Commercialization at Market Access Africa. As Dr. Fezile mentioned, Market Access Africa is a healthcare consulting firm that is helping organizations move their innovations to market, and this is diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics, and everything in between. And today I'll be speaking to the R&D innovation to and translation to product and impact. Okay. Thank you so much, Leila, for rescuing me. So the challenge is that diagnostic innovations and solutions for communicable and non-communicable diseases are not, so that we have limited capacity there, and that they are not point of care ready in most cases, or even near point of care ready. And Africa remains largely underrepresented in this area. So the slide that I've attached here is a slide that was shared by the CEO of FIND in the latest G20 health working groups that were held in Sandton a couple of weeks ago. And the message there is that 47% of patients do not get diagnosed. And when we zoom into maternal health care and cervical cancer, the numbers are much higher. Next, please. And how do we tackle this? The solution is for us to then develop tailored diagnostic solutions and supportive surveillance mechanisms. Next slide, please. So at the center of this is robust disease detection and intervention, and we need to strengthen the capacity in the development, manufacturing, and the commercialization of these solutions. Next, please. To enable this, we need human capacity development, so a critical mass of individuals who are not just researchers, but who can interface between research and business, so who are industry-facing in their activities. We also need a great deal of infrastructure and sustainability, so financial sustainability at that. Next, please. So they mentioned that I was formerly at Mintech, and in this capacity, I was chief scientist in the health platform, as well as the unit director for the DSTI Mintech Nanotechnology Innovation Center Biolabels unit. And our focus here was biomarker discovery and development, rapid diagnostic test development. So the biomarkers would then feed into the rapid diagnostic test development portfolio. And of course, because we're based in the Nanotechnology Innovation Center, the part of our focus was also developing reagents and reporter systems in the form of nanoparticles, so gold, silver, bimetallic, and so on. All of this to generate products, customizable services, and then also service the technology transfer and licensing portfolios at Mintech, while also developing human capacity and sustainability in this area. Next slide, please. So this shows the product development roadmap using the rapid diagnostic test as an example. So moving from development, external validation, clinical trials, and then WHO pre-qualification, product launch, and commercialization. We at Mintech, thanks to a strategic partnership with a commercial with a commercial entity, so private company, so public-private partnership, we were able to move from development all the way to submitting to WHO pre-qualification for an HIV rapid diagnostic test kit within 2 years. And that's a huge deal. Even getting to WHO pre-qualification submission is a massive achievement for any African entity. It is a pain. in terms of getting all of your documentation together, but also it's incredibly expensive. Clinical trials cost in minimum of 6 million South African rands just to do one multi-site clinical trial. So this was a big feat for Mintech. They're still in the process of evaluating the product, and the WHO PQ process itself takes at least 24 months to complete. But right now, the product is in the space where WHO PQ evaluation is in progress, and there's business case mapping and identifying different commercial partners through which to commercialize this, and different licensing or technology transfer type models, depending on what the organization will see fit. Next slide, please. So Dr. Nonhlanhla already touched on some of this, but and thank you for that. So you set the stage for me to drive the message home. So why is it that many promising technologies don't reach the market? We have certain barriers in the general sense. There's lack of or ill-defined manufacturing pathways in certain cases, regulatory hurdles, insufficient investment in ecosystems in Africa. And in certain cases, there's vague route to market plans. And this doesn't just apply to science councils or universities. This also applies to biotech startups or even companies that have been in business for decades, but have moved into a different area of impact or application. Next, please. How do we then tackle this? So the role of African scientists in this area, we would like to have leaders in innovation pipelines across the value chain, not just researchers, but strategists, entrepreneurs, and policy shapers in this regard. Next, please. So putting together some of the challenges and opportunities that we encountered at Mintech, and it's not a Mintech story, it's actually a lot more common than that. So encountered security of supply issues. So raw input materials for the diagnostics that we're developing are incredibly expensive. So we determined to develop and manufacture raw materials where possible. Next, please. The other factor was execution capacity. So the execution capacity on the R&D itself, as well as the manufacturing. And this is when we decided to partner with a third-party co-developer and manufacturing partner. And this was a game changer for us. We recognized that we were in a highly competitive market in terms of diversity and scale. And this is when we decided to pursue commercial partnerships that would enable market entry and then also target both WHO PQ and non-PQ markets. We relied heavily on government funding, and I would advise for universities and science councils particularly to diversify their funding streams away from government funding and get more international funding and as well as private sector type funding. We're also relying, for this particular product, for the HIV product, relying heavily on government as our client. And we, as a new entrant, we're not price competitive. We were not able to enter the tender for the recent tender for HIV rapid diagnostic tests because we're not price competitive, and some of the distributors that we're partnering with also didn't see the commercial return. Even though there was commercial return, it wasn't significant for them to proceed with the application. So there's a need for policy reform here, where in this case we'll partner with the WHO, FIND, UNITAID, and Market Access Africa type institutions to assist with early advocacy and also insist on priority procurement. People call it preferential procurement. I like to call it priority procurement because priority says you're patriotic and preferential says that you're exclusionary. Next, please. So a little bit on what Market Access Africa does. So we support biotech ventures across Africa and beyond to deliver and to navigate the development, commercialization, and regulatory pathways. And the company had focused, for the most part, on the more downstream activities. We're now expanding and growing to more upstream activities. So this is part of the reason why I was also invited to join the team. So early lessons here, there's a need for co-creation with communities and health systems, building products with market entry in mind from the outset. And this is something that researchers really need to get into. I understand that people will consider themselves, oh, I'm just a technical person, but it really, really helps to have the end in mind from the outset. That makes it easier to maneuver through external validation, regulatory pathways, and then market entry. And it's critical to connect innovation to procurement and policy agendas nationally and regionally. Next, please. So what do we need to address? So we need to prioritize tailored diagnostics as entry points for strengthening health systems on the continent. We also need to invest in African-led clinical validation and manufacturing ecosystems, and we are still we still have a long way to go here. We need to enable policies and sustainable funding models. That's another thing that we need to think around at a national level and regionally and otherwise. We also need to invest in cross-continental collaborations that are rooted in equity. So women leading, young people involved, and those good factors that will ensure sustainability. We need to position ourselves, so big picture model, where African researchers are full cycle innovators that can take something from lab to life. And beyond the product development pathway, we need to transform how African science serves African women. As I just mentioned, African women not just benefiting from the science, but also leading the science. Next, please. So final thoughts. I would call on us to strengthen innovation and commercialization continuum, of course, in South Africa and beyond, to ensure that women's health and roles in this space remain central to health system innovation, and to collaborate so that we can all shape a future where African health needs drive and define innovation priorities. Next, please. So these are the two questions that I would like to pose to my fellow panelists and to the audience, and we can chew on this, and we don't necessarily have to have the answers today. But firstly, how do we facilitate capacitation and impactful partnerships on a larger scale in vitro diagnostics and R&D and manufacturing across the continent? So who are the people that need to be in the space, players and champions of these from conception all the way through to market access, implementation, monitoring, and post-market surveillance and such. Second question, how do we build and or enhance trust in brand Africa? So be implementing trust, or rather enhancing trust beyond our fashion and our foods and our art. How do we enhance trust in brand Africa when it comes to healthcare products? I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charlotte. You've touched on quite a number of things that I've just been frantically taking notes, but I think we all know that the market does exist, but our contribution to it seems to be like at the 0.5% because Big Pharma is, they've established that trust that you're talking about. But also the private-public partnerships are so important because they already have some of the experiences that we in the academic space would not normally have, but that skills transfer is just as important. So I'm not going to talk too much, and I'm going to allow the next our next panelist, who is Dr. Shalene, who is from our own manufacturing and development partner, medical diagnostic, to actually then touch on some of those things about how those relationships are either enabling or and how that is working from their perspective as an industry partner, working with academic institutions as well. So thank you, Dr. Shalene.
Thank you so much, Fazile, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this important conversation this morning. So today I will take you through the journey of how we take an idea of scientific innovation into like a real world diagnostic product, especially in the context of Africa. So diagnostics is often the first point of contact in the healthcare system. And in this case, in the case of women's health, especially with STIs and HIV, the right test at the right time could often be life changing. As a South African manufacturer, medical diagnostic, we see firsthand how critical it is to move the innovation into real world use. But the journey from the lab to launch is long and resource intensive and is often very complex. So basically, every diagnostic journey will start with an idea. We'll whether it is amongst colleagues, an idea or a gap in the market that you see. And what we will do is we do our market research, and the next step we would do is look into raw materials. So you would start by identifying relevant biomarkers, selecting platforms, and identifying how you would develop this prototype. Most raw materials, in the sense of lateral flow tests, rapid tests, example antibodies and membranes, are often is very difficult to source locally. So we would normally go internationally, which could also add delays and costs in the development process. So building a rep, sorry, just see. So building once we have a developed test, what the next step would be is we would look into clinical validation. And what we do with clinical validation, we will obviously put the test, um, we would compare the test with we'll test real world samples on these tests and check if it actually works. Collect the data, and we'll often have to, the regulatory approval panels will obviously need like something called a technical file or a product dossier, which we will submit in the local sense to SAPRA and also WHO PQ. On the bench of the field, so validation is often where the innovation gets tested against reality, like I mentioned, of clinical validation. So does your prototype that you've made, does it actually work on real samples, clinical samples? Is it accurate across different populations? So what is meant by this is, for example, in the sense of developing a rapid test for HIV, it needs to work on different subtypes, specifically in your population. And for it to basically make it relevant. But also clinical validation in Africa also faces systemic barriers, a lot of barriers such as regulatory hurdles, ethics approval, funding limitations. And still, when African researchers validate products in African setting, we will get diagnostics that actually work for us. So some of the challenges and opportunities and lessons. So what I find is that validation, sorry, one of our biggest hurdles that I find specifically working in medical diagnostic is the regulatory approval. It's long and it's tedious, and especially example from our experience, WHOPQ, if you want to example compete in tenders, they often require you to have that qualification. And if you're a small company, it's time consuming and offering an entry barrier, and funding is one of the major hurdles, and grants and partnerships. So if you don't know where to go, it will take longer. It can take 2 years to 3 years. So what does a thriving South Africa or African cord diagnostic ecosystem look like? It's one where diagnostics can be designed, validated, and manufactured and approved locally. So if we can work together as African scientists, we will be able to serve our country better. So at Medical Diagnostic, that is one of the visions we work towards daily. We wish to, with the innovation, to reach the clinic and not just sit on the shelf and actually serve our people. So with aligned regulation and investment, so if we are able to get that funding and partner with the necessary partners, it will basically make stronger partnerships, especially amongst women innovators, and we'll be able to actually serve our women. Thank you. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I was just making notes now that I think in every single one of the panelists, everyone has mentioned that the reason why we need local access to reagents, it's not just a cost thing, it's also a security thing. So one of the things that you learn in business is that you want to limit risk as much as
Yes.
possible, and no one is going to support or fund any of your innovations if you can't guarantee access to the raw materials that you actually need. So thank you for highlighting that. Next up, we have Dr. Lindy, who is a co-PI on the GIFT team and is doing fantastic work in the female reproductive health case.
Thanks, Fazile. Can everyone see that? And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm joining from Australia today. And before I start, when we meet over here in Australia, we like to acknowledge the original First Nations owners of the lands from where we're meeting from. And today I'm on the Gundungurra and Darawal, the land of the Gundungurra and Darawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So I'm going to be giving my perspectives on developing point-of-care tests for women's health, focusing on the work that we do in African countries. I think you'll hear a lot of synergies and alignment with what the earlier speakers have already highlighted for all of you. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of earlier on in the pathway for product development, all the steps needed before you kind of get to that commercialization stage. So I'm a biomedical scientist by training, and I spent many years in the lab, very focused on the work happening on my bench. But some of the findings from our work really started to highlight gaps in the tools that we have to support women's sexual and reproductive health in African countries and also other low middle income settings. And we began to think more and more about how our work might address some of these gaps. So this started me on a path to translate our research in around 2010. And it's been quite a journey since then, both exciting, fulfilling, and also challenging. So this graphic outlines how we are working towards developing low-cost point-of-care tests, mainly for women's health in Africa and other countries. So through our basic science discovery work that involves, unique cohorts of women and girls in Africa and other countries, we identify health problems and gaps, and then we conduct studies to explore possible biomarkers for point-of-care test development. And we focus on the discovery of protein biomarkers using mass spec and other technologies, because proteins can be easily measured in lateral flow format. And this is really important to us because we're really aiming to develop low cost, accessible, easy to use tests that are really true point of care and meet the WHO's reassured criteria. So after the biomarker validation, our aim is to then progress to point of care test development. And we also work with collaborators to identify use cases and develop strategies for implementation through user experience studies, health economic studies, and also engagement with various stakeholders, both end users and healthcare practitioners. And then the next step is to clinically evaluate devices, with these last few steps really feeding back into refinement and optimization of the devices. So for our most advanced test at the moment, we're currently in the pre-commercialization stage, and that is GIFT that Fazile introduced earlier on in the webinar. And although my program includes several projects looking at different diseases and conditions, they're mostly in Africa, and so I've highlighted the ones that involve African women in blue. I'm going to focus on our experiences through GIFT today. So I thought I'd go into a bit more detail about GIFT and draw from our experiences through this project to highlight what I think are some of the things that enable and also challenge the progress towards point of care test development in low middle income settings like South Africa. So GIFT has been a 15-year project so far. We followed a similar path to the overview that I gave on the previous slide, from identifying the problem and then the biomarkers through to the point where we're now planning the registration trial for the device in South Africa. And so this timeline, of course, looks really nice and clean and looks like a very kind of linear process. But in reality, I love to show this graphic because I think this kind of more accurately depicts what this sort of initiative really looks like. So this was drawn by a graphic designer who attended one of our investigator meetings. And I think it gives you an idea of the complexity of the different stages of the work and how multifactorial the work really is. So you can see that there are lots of different important parts of developing the device here highlighted in pink. Lots of different considerations, like the raw materials that you are absolutely essential for device development, availability of clinical samples. Then there's your clinical studies and trials. And then importantly, all of that research that goes into developing strategies for actual implementation of devices within a given context so that the device fits with the needs and resources of that particular context. And ultimately, all of this informs the commercialization plan. And from there, you move to adoption and scale up that you've heard more about from others today. So I lastly wanted to highlight some more my perspectives on key enablers and challenges through the process. And I think this has also been highlighted by others, but strong partnerships and multidisciplinary collaboration is absolutely essential. We can't do it all. You really need a diverse set of skills to move a test forward, right from the basic sciences research through to implementation. End user and stakeholder engagement is also absolutely essential. The use cases that you identify through these processes affect how your devices are formatted, how they're evaluated, and ultimately how they're used in the healthcare systems. So the earlier on you can do this work and really engage with stakeholders, the better. And then, communication is key for both of these aspects above. We all maybe speak slightly different languages in our different areas, and it's also important to know and understand how to communicate what you're trying to do with the stakeholders and people who'll be using the devices at the end of the day. We've also heard quite a bit about infrastructure and limitations as far as resources go for product development in low middle income settings. We've experienced this where raw materials that we've needed for device development, like antibodies, can only be sourced from overseas, and trying to purchase really expensive antibodies and ship them over causes massive delays. And ultimately, if we have the ability to develop these and manufacture these resources locally, I think that will remove a lot of barriers to device development. And of course, there are fewer biotech companies in low middle income settings in general compared to high income settings, and sometimes technology is also not quite as advanced. So capacity building in those areas, which is the next item on my list, is really critical, and also training the next generation of translational researchers. So I like to think that all of those young investigators that have been involved in the GIFT project are maybe our next generation of translational scientists. There are issues around patenting biomarkers, which I won't really get into in the interest of time. And also the regulatory pathways can be unclear and sometimes and very complex and time consuming as well, which you've also heard more about from others. And lastly, funding. And I love this meme because I think it really depicts how I often feel when I'm trying to apply for funding for things. And I think it's sometimes hard to find funding for product development because it's high risk, but potentially, really high reward as well. So with that, Thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you, Lindy, for your perspective. I think you've highlighted some really important things, and I think we've tried by all means from the GIFT team to actually tackle some of those issues of communicating. I think as basic scientists, our only form of communication is through our journal articles, but I think through platforms like this, we've also, extended that communication to audiences that we normally wouldn't have interacted with, and we hope that through that we actually get, the entire nation around the innovation process and the pipeline. So I am going to, everyone seems to be, to have their cameras on now. And I'd like to just take this opportunity first to thank our panelists. I think your perspectives and your experiences are shaping a lot of what needs to happen. And I think having this conversation right now is so important, because the gaps are that we are not able to as effectively work together as possible. So the systems that we need to build will come from conversations like this, and in identifying from a different perspective what needs to happen for those things to move forward. I've got a few questions on here, but I think the most straightforward one is, how do you support budding scientists? And I think Lindy mentioned that, but